Okay, done with this one. Let's move on to heat. Ugh. This is boring.
I've made a huge mistake.
So I was starting to work on my heat production tier list, and I just realized how boring all the cards were. And so I decided to make a video first to address something that I've been saying in a few of my videos, and that is that heat sucks. I really hate heat as a strategy in terraforming Mars, but maybe I don't even hate it as much as the game designers do, because it really just can't catch a break. I definitely intend to finish the tier list, that'll be my next video. But I wanna talk a little about why I think it's just a weak strategy and also why I hate it. And the main reason I hate it, it's because it's boring. Like, when I get something like viral enhancers in my head, I immediately start thinking, okay, maybe I can get decomposers and ecological zone, and then maybe I can play some 1-point animals, and then I can play advanced ecosystems for 5 points and 3 plants.
Then I'll put that flea in a box, and then I'll put that box inside of another box, and then I'll mail that box to myself. And when it arrives, I'll smash it with a hammer. It's brilliant, brilliant, brilliant!
Or, you know, when I have a couple of Jovian multipliers, every Jovian tag I see, it's like this whole exciting thing, and it's only the tag, the tiniest piece of the card. But when I'm building a heat engine, and I get something like I play Soleta in the first turn, it feels like it's gonna be awesome, but then a few turns later, I feel more like...
Well, this sucks.
There's just no excitement in, waiting to get 8 heat and then raising the temperature and doing that for the whole game. It synergizes with basically nothing else, and not only is it boring, it's also weak, so you lose a lot, and losing is not fun. I mean, there are fun ways to lose, but that one is definitely not one. So losing doesn't help, which brings me to my next point. As much as I hate heat, I don't think I hate it as much as the game designers, because they have not been kind to it, and it only gets worse with time. It's like the heat is the Toby Flenderson to the game designer's Michael Scott.
Toby is in HR, which technically means he works for corporate, so he's really not a part of our family. Also, he's divorced, so he's really not a part of his family.
Okay, so let's talk about why it's boring. And that's because it's a very one-dimensional resource. If you think of the 3 money resources, mega credits let you do anything. Still in titanium, not anything, but like with titanium you can do big space cards, you can do Jovian cards, you can do space events and rush the game. With steel cards, they sort of like are mostly production cards that fit into all strategies. There's steel cards for both titanium and steel, there's steel cards for energy, there's steel cards for heat, there's steel cards for city, so pretty much any strategy will require some amount of steel. And then plants, plants, you can say they're also one-dimensional. The only thing you can do with them is place greeneries, but placing greeneries is a little more complex than just increasing the temperature. When you place greeneries, you get to place tiles, and with those tiles you get to pick up resources, you get to decide where the tile goes, and then you get to place cities and build your city greenery triangles, and then you can use other cities to steal points from other people's greeneries. So there's a lot to do with the plants. And energy is sort of a wildcard resource where you can use oxygen bumpers, you can let it turn into heat, or you can consume the production to use development cards, or you can use something like physics complex to straight up gain victory points. So energy kind of lets you do a little bit of everything. And then heat, on the other hand, you just raise the temperature, and raising the temperature is just gaining 1 TR, and you basically just Increase your production, raise the temperature. Increase more your production and raise the temperature a little more. So it's very boring. You don't do anything with it. There's no interaction except for hitting the milestones on the track with other players. So it's a very boring way to play. However, I'm more interested in talking about why it sucks. And let's just look at it. Let's start with how it's valued in the base game. And in the base game, I would say it's pretty close to steel and energy, or that was the original intention. If you look at three cards, steel mine, power plant, and micro mills, they all produce one of the resource with no other effect. Micro mills cost one less, but it also has no tax, so you could argue that the one mega credit difference could be due to the steel and energy tag in the case of power plant, which doesn't, energy tags don't really matter. Watch my tag video for more details. But yeah, the steel tag, you could argue that's worth a mega credit. So it's priced really similarly, or they think it's a little weaker than the other two. So to understand if any resource is worth it or weak or strong, you basically have to compare the value that it costs to acquire it versus the value that it provides. So we know it costs almost the same as steel and energy to acquire. So does it provide more, less, or the same? The easiest comparison is energy. So energy turns into heat one turn after you produce it. So in that sense, heat is strictly better, but only slightly than energy, because you get it one turn earlier. However, energy can do a lot more than that, which is where it's much better than heat, because, well, you can use the energy production to fuel some good economy cards, or you can use it to play cities. You can also use energy for oxygen bumpers, which provide usually for 4 energy, one terraforming rating, so the same as 8 heat. Now you are using another card to accomplish this, but it's also giving you steel or titanium, and they pay back from themselves somewhat, and they'll give you the same amount of victory points. And then you can also use energy to do something like physics complex, and as a last resort, I would say you would let it turn into heat and use it as heat. So heat is essentially slightly better than the worst use there is for energy. So when you take that into account, energy is a much better resource than heat, and it should cost more than a mega credit or half a mega credit more than heat. And then steel, well, this is a lot harder to compare because steel and heat are used very differently, but steel is just so much more flexible, and it's used in so many cards that provide good production value, like strip mine or electro catapult, or which both require energy, by the way, and mine, titanium mine, mining rights, mining area. There's just so many good early production cards that require steel, and it also helps you achieve some milestones like builder and probably mayor too. So in the base game, yeah, steel is way more important than heat, especially early. Now, we know that both titanium and plants are more expensive, so let's talk about each of them. So when you compare the value of plants and heat, I get double the victory points for using 8 plants and for using 8 heats, at least. If I have any cities around it, even though that's an additional cost, then it's even more. And I'm also picking stuff from the ground, so I get to place tiles next to oceans, pick some resources. So yeah, 8 plants are way better than 8 heat. Now it's priced a little more expensive, and it's really hard to determine how much, because plants price is very affected by parameter restrictions. But that brings me to my next point, which is plants are actually not more expensive than heat mid-game. And you can look at cards like algae, kelp farming, and realize that they cost pretty much about the same as heat per resource. You just have to wait a little more, and which means you can just invest into your economy early, which again makes plants much better. And then titanium, it's the most expensive resource to produce. Besides titanium mine, there's nothing really very cheap to get one titanium production. but it does feel the best cards in the game, which are all the big space cards, like the giant multipliers, all the big asteroids, among many other good space cards that provide usually very good points or terraforming steps. And finally, mega credits. Well, that is the cheapest resource, but it is the most versatile as well. So you need mega credits in every strategy basically. And it's a much better resource than heat for that reason, even though it's cheaper. So you could argue heat is the most overpriced resource and the second least valuable, only because mega credits are technically least valuable, even though I often prefer them and they do provide more flexibility. So that's the first reason why heat sucks in the base game. However, there are more. A big problem with heat is that there are, like I said, some very good asteroid cards that terraform the temperature and basically take points away from the heat player. And no such thing happens with plants. There's one event, Towing a Comet has one oxygen step, and then there are two more cards that have oxygen steps, and then there are their oxygen bumpers, but those are not as impactful as the big space events. The two big ones, Giant Ice Asteroid and Deimos Down, are widely considered two of the best cards in the game, and they'll get played in pretty much every game. And then there's other ones, very good ones, like Big Asteroid, which gets 2 steps, and other very good early development cards like Nuclear Zone or Lava Flows. So therefore, you have more steps with heat, but you'll get more steps stolen away from you, or you'll steal them from yourself by throwing the asteroids yourself, because it might even be worth it. The third problem in the base game is there is a lack of very good heat cards. My favorite ones, the only ones I consider very good, are Molehole Area and Optimal Air Break-In, and both have to be played really early, which is very different to plants where you can play something like Insects after mid-game and it'll be great, and it can give you a production of more than Molehole, and probably more overall plants than Optimal Air Break-In gives you heat. So you have no overpowered heat cards really, with these two being just okay, I would argue. And then there's a series of really bad ones, and they all have the problem that they all have to be played early. You could argue the 3 money resources mostly have to be played early, and that's true, but they're much more flexible and more valuable. And the other points resource, which is plants, you can play plants after mid. You can have no plant production until Gen 5 and have a decent ground game. You're not gonna you're not gonna rush the oxygen with that strategy, but you'll have a decent ground game and some decent points from cities and granaries. You can't do that with heat. If you don't have the heat early, you're just better off throwing asteroids. And finally, the last problem, which I find really weird, is that heat was the only resource that was given no tag in the base game. Like, if you think about it, steel and titanium obviously have a tag for the building and space tag, and then the plant definitely is aligned with a plant tag, and then energy has the energy tag, as useless as it is, but it gets a corporation that has some synergy with that and a couple of cards that depend on it. And then mega credits, there's no official tag, but it's sort of the Earth tag, and that's a theme throughout the game. A lot of discount cards like Earth Catapult, all the plain simple money production cards like Sponsors or Acquired Company, they're all Earth tags, and then it's often the tag that gets multiplied for income in cards like Cartel and Miranda Resort. So yeah, I would say it's definitely the money card, and if you see the Money Corp, which is the Raptor, the richest corp in the game in Mega Credits, has an Earth tag. So I would argue Mega Credits did get a tag. Heat didn't get a tag, and tags are something that provide great synergy. Like, if you look at plants, 2 of the best cards for plant production are Insects and NRA, and they both depend on the number of plant tags you have to give you better production numbers. Same things happened with Cartel and Miranda Resort, which I just mentioned. And then there also can be things like awards and milestones. Now, to be fair, Heat did get an award, Heat Resources, and that's basically to maybe make up for the fact that you can't do anything with heat after the temperature is maxed out. Because you can with plants, and energy turns into heat, so Thermalists did sort of make up for that. So let's look at the expansions. Let's go chronologically. Hellas and Elysium is what I like to call a lateral expansion. It doesn't actually expand the game, it just provides new options that can replace components in the game to add some variability. Now, it's very nice. I recommend anyone who has the game to buy this because you do need the variability, but it's not truly an expansion. It didn't add any mechanics to the game. It didn't even add corporations or cards, which I would not consider an expansion even, just on their own. But yeah, it did change something. So first of all, Elysium is more ground focused than Hellas, and there's a lot of good plant spots, so it kind of makes the ground game stronger. With Hellas, however, they did try to make it better. I think they made an effort. The game designers made an effort for heat. They added spots in the board where you can pick up heat. There's two problems with these. One, there weren't that many, and two, heat doesn't play styles like plants do with greenery, so there's not that much synergy anyway. So you might pick up a couple of them, but it's not like plants where you place and pick and place and pick and place and pick. However, overall, I think with these expansions, he took a step back, because the other thing that the expansion brought with the boards was new awards and milestones. And so, if you think of the baseboard, Tharsis, you had Terraformer, which is very hard to reach, but it was there. But they had Thermalist, and Thermalist was huge for the Heat player. So when her Thermalist goes, what do we get? In Elysium, the best milestone to claim for a Heat player, I think it's Specialist, because Heat is one of the cheaper resources, so it's easier to get to 10. It is, however, much harder than Mega Credits. But the only thing the Heat player had in Tharsis was Terraformer, so maybe nothing happened there. However, in the awards, they got completely screwed. They get nothing. Benefactor, maybe? But it's nowhere near as good as Thermalist was for the Heat player, because the Plant player can get it, or the Asteroid player can get it. And then there are two ground game themed awards, like Desert Settler and State Dealer, so the Plant player can realistically go for 3 of those, and the Asteroid player can go for Celebrity and Benefactor. So yeah, step back. In Hellas, on the other hand, it might be even worse. There's nothing on the milestones. Diversifiers for anyone, Tactician, maybe the Plant player. Polar Explorer is definitely not for the Heat player. Energizer is for energy, so energy gets more than heat. And Green Settler is not for the Heat player. And then on the awards, nothing. You got Cultivator and Resources. Those are generally plant and microbe animal awards. And then Space Baron, Contractor. Okay, so there are a few Heat cards that have those tags, but they're not going to be maybe that heavy on them. So you lose Thermalist, you get nothing. It's like they tried, but deep down, they just hated Heat too much.
I tried to talk to Toby and be his friend, but that is like trying to be friends with an evil snail. I feel like I'm dying inside.
Next came Venus. Now, Venus is an expansion focused on a new parameter to terraform and a new resource, floaters, so it's understandable that there wasn't a lot of help for Heat in it. However, it could have been a little better than it was. It added 2 cards to produce heat, GHG import from Venus and orbital reflectors, and they're all both very similar. You're gonna wonder why they decided to design them so similar. And neither of them are good. If you're going for heat, you generally want to rush, and you don't want to pay early for extra Venus terraforming steps. And you want to stay away from Venus, because Venus actually makes the game a lot longer. So you're basically paying for a victory point up front, and with that you are just getting a less efficient card in terms of production, in terms of rushing the game. So overall, the cards didn't help. The theme didn't help, as I said, and then if we look at the corporations, where 3 of them are Venus focused, which is understandable, even if one is too shitty to understand why they designed it that way. And then the other 2, Viron, it's focused on blue cards that tap once per turn, and if you want to use it on underground detonations, and I can't find a good reason to do that except maybe... or maybe you just hate yourself. Then it really doesn't go with heat, it goes much better with animals, microbes, and science, which are all better suited for a long game. And then Manutech really does better with the money resources, so Mega Credit, Steel, and Titanium, because playing those and getting the rebate as soon as you play production cards of those resources is where Manutech shines. So, in conclusion, the expansion made the game a lot longer. None of the corporations were really suited for a short game, which probably made the metagame a little longer in general, with less players trying to rush, now that there is a bigger density of corporations that want a long game. And the hit cards didn't really help, so this was all just a step back. Not a horrible, deliberate step back with the intention of making the resource worse, but they had to sacrifice one resource in favor of the new mechanics, and hit was probably the one worse off.
Michael?
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt. It appears we're one bathrobe short.
Take it from Toby.
Copy.
Hey, Dwight. Pretty nice robes there. Why?
Then came Prelude. Now, Prelude was a pretty small expansion, didn't really add much in terms of projects. The big thing that it added was the Prelude cards. And there are 3 that are hit themed, which is an okay proportion, I would say. However, none of them are anything to write home about. They're all mediocre. Mohall probably the best one, and Polar Industries the second, and Mohall Excavation closely third. A little more versatile if you like that. But really, there's none of them that will break the game, like other cards like Allied Bank or Ecology Experts could. So yeah, it was all like filler basically for Heat, and then it added 7 projects, and none of them have anything to do with Heat at all. Even you could argue the Wild Tag, which was introduced, the only thing it has nothing to do with is Heat, because Heat has no tag. So this was more of a consequence of how bad Heat already was than just making it worse in this one. But then there are the corporations, and the corporations, I love the Prelude corporations. They're my favorite set of corporations, and they're all kind of engine themed. You have Viator, which wants a long game. Point Luna wants a long game. They're both Earth and Space Corps with focus on victory points. Then you have Chunching Mars, which is a card that you want to play a lot of early steel production cards with. Valitros, kind of the theme will depend more on the preludes than on the science ability, but the science ability really doesn't throw you towards a hit game. And then finally Robinson Industries, which does a little bit of everything, but really with Robinson you want to increase your titanium and steel as much as you can. So I find that it always steers away from heat somehow. So all of these corporations really favor an engine game, even though the preludes sort of make it shorter. But when you play with Prelude and Venus, which were the available expansions at the time, the engine corps did okay. So I wouldn't say Prelude directly made it worse, but it did indirectly, because of the things that made it bad from before affected it more than it did other strategies. They added the Wild Tag, which, because Heat is the only thing without a tag, is the only thing it doesn't help. They added Preludes, which grant you basically production or large amounts of resources, and because Heat is already a weak resource, the Heat Preludes are at best mediocre. And it added new corps, and because they want to make the corps as exciting as possible, and Heat isn't exciting, then none of them have anything to do with Heat, and it moves them away from Heat again. So you could say this wasn't present hatred, but the past hatred really influenced how Preludes affected Heat.
You know, I know a little bit about what you're going through in a way. When I was a kid, my parents got divorced. I loved them both so much. I just wanted.
Then came Colonies, and this is when it really started getting really bad. The main mechanic added is, of course, the colonies, which basically there's one for every resource, and Europa, which is weird. And yeah, the heat one, Io, just sucks. Io is the worst colony in my opinion. I only trade with it when it gets to like above 8, and even then I can wait one generation. So yeah, pretty much every other strategy got a little better except heat, which is weird. They could have just added better numbers to the heat colony knowing it was the weakest resource, and it would have made it decent. Or they could have made the colonies bonus like cards or something, or plants, or something that gave synergy but wasn't just heat. It's just the worst colony. So that wasn't great. And moreover, they made energy awesome in this expansion. So the resource that was most similar to heat but known for its versatility became super versatile and useful in colonies. Leaving heat definitely as the worst resource of all. And then the projects, okay, I like the heat project in colonies. It's a decent card, but it's only 1 out of 49 project cards. Nothing else has anything to do with heat except Impactor Swarm, but it's not really heat production. It's just good for selling Thermalist or something like that. So yeah, nothing in terms of heat production really that's too good. And then the corporations. So well, there's 2 colony themed. Of course, it's a new expansion. We theme things according to the expansion. So Aridor and Poseidon, they're both really good. I love Aridor especially. Nothing to do with heat, that's fine. Then Arclight, yeah, we needed an animal corporation. It's been long overdue, and I love Arclight. And then Polyphemus, a really weird one. No tag, but it really favors playing few expensive cards, which is nothing to do with heat. And then Stormcraft. I don't think they were trying this time. I think this is more of a joke. I love Jovians. I love resources on cards, so floaters on Jovians are one of my favorite things to do in colonies, and yet I hate this corporation because at the beginning of the game you probably have to place some floaters on itself, and unless you place a few, then you have some worthless heat. It's just there's no synergy here. I really hate this ability where you convert floaters into heat. Anything else you can do with floaters in the whole game is better, really. It just made me hate heat a little more.
If I had a gun with 2 bullets and I was in a room with Hitler, Bin Laden, and Toby, I would shoot Toby twice.
And then came Turmoil. Now, Turmoil is a great expansion, probably my favorite, and the main mechanic that it added was the Congress, which determines what the ruling bonus is and the ruling policy. And the ruling policy for the heat oriented party is shit. The Kelvinist policy is just absolute shit. It's basically the ability of underground detonations. And underground detonations is just
shit.
I mean, what the fuck? This is one of the worst cards in the base game. Like, I get that you make the mistake in the base game. The game hadn't been play tested to death at that point, but this was like 4 years later, and the 5th expansion. You should know by now that you can't model a policy after that piece of shit card. If you compare it to the other policy that you can tap for 10 mega credits, it's the Scientist, and you can draw 3 cards, which is like 1,000 times better than increasing your energy and heat 1 step each. You can even do it more than once per turn, so this is no way to build a heat engine. It's super slow, it won't rush a game, it won't accomplish anything really. It's not good for economic. I've never once paid the price for this policy, except if I need the energy and it's 1 cheaper than the standard project, and it gives you a hit as a collateral, so it's better than, straight up better than the energy standard project, except you can only use it once. So that's the only use it has, to give you 1 energy when you really need it for 1 cheaper, with 1 hit as an added bonus, which I rarely use anyway, because hit is fucking shit at this point. And I am going to talk about how the other parts of the expansion affected hit, and it's not positive overall, but this is enough to be the final nail on the coffin. This killed hit for me.
See ya.
Far and away the most expensive shot of the movie, but it was integral to the story.
Okay, the bonus is not so terrible. It's actually the one that's gonna race faster, because you can do something like Mohole Gen 1, and suddenly your bonus is 4 mega credits. And for the other policies, the tag-based policies, they're not gonna race to 4 as fast, but they will race much further later in the game. So, like your combined Earth tax with Jovian and Venus, or even just the building tax, they're gonna be bigger than your heat production, because you don't really want your heat production to go to 20 or even past 10. Usually, you're overdoing it, and you're over investing in something that has no use. So, or no use after the temperature is maxed. So yeah. Policy is complete shit. Bonus is probably the best one. The first maybe 3 or 4, probably 2 or 3 generations, and then it might be the weakest. But the policy is way more important than the bonus. And if you look at the other policies, they're all awesome. Especially the greens. I love the greens policy, and I love the reds policy. So the other thing that it added was the events, and the events are really varied. They sort of did 1 for each theme, and the heat one gives you, it's one of the worst, gives you 1 heat production for each influence. Influence can be a maximum of 3. It's usually not gonna be 3. You have to have a lot of things in the board to make it 3. So there's really no heat production. If you compare it to the one that gives you energy production, that one gives you energy for every 2 energy tags plus influence. So it's gonna be better. Just with 2 tags, it's gonna be better than the heat one, and that's because energy has a tag, because this was probably a design mistake not to give heat a tag, in my opinion. If I could go back and redo some aspects of this game, it would be give heat a tag, and make AI Central's requirement 5 science tags instead of 3, because it ruins fucking games when people play it on me on turn 3 and I just want to quit at that point. But that's another fucking conversation. They did add 2 cards that produce heat that I think are decent. They're pretty cheap, so they're efficient in terms of heat production, but they do require the Calvinists to be in power, and I don't know why you would put delegates there. I mean, other than maybe the first generations if you played a hit card, so and they're not very impactful cards, so they're good because they're cheap, so they're not gonna flip the game. But let's go over the corporations. So I'm gonna go over the 8 corporations, the 5 Turmoil and the 3 promo that were released with that expansion. And so let's start. Septon Tribus, or Tribus, I don't know. So low starting capital, and it's focused on the Senate. Every expansion has the corporation that has to be focused on the expansion itself. Not really suited for heat play. It has a wild tag, which, as I said before, it's great for anything except heat. So, and yeah, I don't want to keep fucking repeating myself about the wild tag, but yeah, it's funny how that worked out. Then Terra Labs starts with 14. You can't rush the game with that. Basically, that's game over for rushing. And you'll basically want to buy as many cards as possible. This is probably the corporation that wants the longest game of all. Pre-Star. So, Pre-Star can't terraform. It just can't rush. You have to do it like every 4 generations or 5 generations if you can. But really, it's the anti-terraforming corporation. It has to terraform all in one turn, not suited for heat. Lakefront Resorts, focus on the ground game. You want to place a lot of tiles, you want to get the extra mega credit from the bonus of the oceans, and you want to place your oceans fast so that you can get the increase in income fast. It's the one thing that was missing, an ocean focus for corporation, and I think it might be the strongest in the set. Phalaris. Philaris also ground game. You wanna place a lot of tiles and just basically be all up on your opponent's game. Great design for Philaris, not related to heat at all. And then Monster Insurance. Monster Insurance pretty versatile. It basically starts with money and messes up your opponent's game. That's actually not great for rushing. It slows down the game, but you can still do anything with it, so I'll give you that one. Monster Insurance can do heat because it can do kind of anything depending on its hand. And then Factorum, you see, they only had one energy corporation, Thorgate, and it was kind of underwhelming. Most people don't like it. I think it's underrated. But they try to fix energy a little more. They helped it in Colonies and they helped it in Turmoil. And here you go, Factorum is actually pretty good. It combos great with high-tech lab and power infrastructure, and I love the ability to draw building text because those are great early. They are generally development cards, plus it's poor, so you don't want to do a lot of heat with a poor corporation. You don't want to rush the game with a corporation that is poor. It's a little harder. And then finally, Utopia Invest, also pretty flexible. But its ability, like the last thing I want to use it, it's heat because it's the least valuable resource. So you are better off focusing on anything else. Usually plants and titanium are the best thing to use its ability with. So even though it's flexible, it's better for anything except heat. So there you go. That's the end. In conclusion for Turmoil, Wars Policy, final nail in the coffin. Couple of good cards. None of the corporations are focused on heat, and none have been since Helion, which absolutely sucks. So yeah, I think this did it. The game designers did it. I am never doing a heat strategy again in a game of Terraforming Mars.
Goodbye, Tommy! Goodbye, Tommy! Goodbye!